Hello again, this is Mr. Bowlby. We are in Domain 1, The Wind in the Willows. This is CKLA for the 3rd grade. This lesson is Lesson 4, The Wildwood. To start, let's just look at these pictures right here. 4 seasons. Our story does cover a lot of ground in time throughout the 4 seasons. We know from Lesson 1 that our story started out in the spring because Mole was spring cleaning. And then, of course, you have summertime, and autumn, or fall, and winter. So we're going to see our characters move throughout these seasons. What have we already learned? Well, we know the difference between dialogue and narrative. Dialogue is what is happening between characters while they talk to each other, that's in quotations, and narration is everything that is not in quotation. And then perspective. Perspective is how someone sees or experiences something. It's a literary tool, just like dialogue and narration. It helps the reader know whose experience we are learning more about in the story. We're learning more about something going on from that perspective. Now, like dialogue, perspective can shift from one character to another. We are going to see, read aloud today, the perspective switch from one character to another. So listen carefully. Here's some key vocabulary for you to jot down in your notebook. Pay attention to. The words domestic, evasively, feeble, heartedly, and postpone. So you may want to pause and write all those down. Okay? The title of this chapter is called The Wildwood. So I'm going to ask you, based on this image, describe the Wildwood. And do you remember the conversation Rat and Mole had about the Wildwood? If you don't remember, here it is. Rat and Mole had a conversation about the Wildwood as they were floating along the river. And Rat definitely did not seem too excited about going into the Wildwood. He described for Mole several of the characters that you would meet there. Rabbits, squirrels, and of course dear old Badger. He also mentioned that the weasels, stoats, and foxes could not be trusted. That will come into play later in the story. Again, here is our picture of the Willows countryside. Alright. The Mole had long wanted to meet the Badger, but the Water Rat always had a reason to postpone the occasion. Badger will turn up some day or the other, Rat would say. Couldn't you ask him to dinner? Said the Mole. He wouldn't come, replied the Rat simply. Well then, supposing we go and call on him, suggested the Mole. Oh, he wouldn't like that at all, said the Rat, quite alarmed. Besides, he lives in the middle of the Wildwood. Well, supposing he does like it, said the Mole. You told me the Wildwood was all right. I know, so it is, replied the Rat evasively. But he wouldn't be at home at this time of year anyhow. The Mole had to be content with this. Summer had left, taking the warmth and sweet fragrances with it. The autumn and winter days brought cold winds and glistening frost. No one thought about boating, and so, with time to ponder, the Mole began to think once more of Badger. In the wintertime, the Rat slept a great deal. He retired early and rose late. Consequently, the Mole had plenty of spare time on his hands. One afternoon, while the Rat was rested in his armchair before the fire, he decided he would explore the Wildwood and perhaps meet Mr. Badger. It was a cold, still afternoon when he slipped out of the warm parlor. The country lay bare and leafless around him. The Mole liked the country like this, stripped of its finery, and so, with great cheerfulness of spirit, he pushed on towards the Wildwood. There was nothing to alarm him at first. Then, as his journey progressed, he moved into a shadowy world in which trees crouched near and the holes in the various tree trunks gaped like hideous mouths. The dusk descended steadily. Then the faces began. It was over his shoulder that he first thought he saw a face. Then he turned and confronted it. The whole thing had vanished. He quickened his pace. He passed another hole, and a little narrow face flashed up. If he could only get away from the holes. He thought there would be no more faces. He swung off the path and plunged into the untrodden places of the wood. Then the whistling began. Very faint it was when first he heard it, but somehow it made him hurry forward. Then the pattering began. He thought it was only the leaves falling at first. Then as it grew, he knew it was the pat-pat of little feet. The mole began to run. He ran up against things. He fell over things. At last he took refuge in the hollow of an old beech tree. Terrified and exhausted, the mole lay there trembling. Meanwhile, the rat, warm and comfortable, dozed by his fireside. It was not until a coal in the fire slipped and set up a spurt of flames that he awoke. He immediately looked around for his companion, but the mole was not there. He listened for a time. The house seemed very quiet. Then he called, "Moley," several times, and receiving no answer, got up and went into the hall. The mole's cap was missing from its peg. His Wellington boots were also gone. The rat left the house and found the mole's tracks leading straight to the Wildwood. The rat stood in deep thought. Then he re-entered the house, strapped a belt around his waist, shoved a brace of pistols into it. Finally, he picked up a stout cudgel and set off for the Wildwood. It was already getting toward dusk when he reached the wood. As he moved from among the trees, the rat looked about for his friend. Here and there, the wicked little faces puffed out of holes, but vanished immediately at the sight of such a well-armed creature. The rat called out to his friend for an hour or more. When at last he heard the little answering cry, guided by the sound, he made his way to an old beech tree with a hole in it. From out of the hole came a feeble voice saying, "Ratty, is that really you?" The rat crept into the hole. There he found the mole. "Oh, rat," he cried, "I've been so frightened." "Oh, I quite understand," said the rat, soothingly. "We riverbankers hardly ever come here by ourselves." "Surely the brave Mr. Toad wouldn't mind coming here by himself, would he?" inquired the mole. "Old Toad?" said the rat, laughing heartily. "He wouldn't show his face here alone for anything." The mole was greatly cheered by the sound of Rat's laughter. "Now then," said the rat, we really must make a start for home." "Dear rat," said the poor mole, "you must let me rest a while longer." "Oh, all right," said the rat. "It's nearly pitch dark now, and there ought to be a bit of moon later." So the mole snuggled down and went to sleep, while the rat lay patiently waiting with a pistol in his paw. When at last the mole woke up, the rat said, "Now then, I'll just take a look outside and see if everything's quiet. Then we really must be off." He went to the entrance and put his head out first. "What's up, Ratty?" asked the mole. "Snow is up," replied the rat briefly, "or rather down." The mole came and crouched beside him, looking out, saw a gleaming carpet of fine powder was springing up everywhere. "Well, it can't be helped," said the rat. "We must make a start. Worst of it is, I don't exactly know where we are, and now the snow makes everything look so very different." It did indeed. Nevertheless, they set out bravely. An hour or two later, they realized that they were lost. They sat down on a fallen tree trunk to rest. "We can't sit here very long," said the rat. "The snow will soon be too deep for us to wade through." He peered about, considered. "Look here," he went on. "There's a dell down there in front of us. Let's make our way down into that. Try to find some sort of shelter." So once more they plodded onward. As they searched for a corner that was dry, the mole tripped and fell forward in his face. "Oh, my leg!" he cried. "My poor shin!" "Poor old mole," said the rat kindly. "You don't seem to have very much luck today. Let's have a look at that leg." "I must have tripped over a hidden branch or a stump," said the mole miserably. "It's a very clean cut," said the rat, examining it. "It looks as if it were made by a sharp edge of something made of metal." "Well, never mind what done it," said the mole, forgetting his grammar in his pain. "It hurts just the same whatever done it." But the rat, after carefully tying up the leg with his handkerchief, was busy scraping in the snow. He scratched and shoveled while the mole waited impatiently. Suddenly the rat cried, "Hooray!" "What have you found, Ratty?" asked the mole. "Come and see," said the delighted rat. The mole hobbled up to the spot and had a good look. "Well," he said at last slowly, "I see it right enough, a door scraper." "Well, what of it?" "But don't you see what it means?" cried the rat. "Of course I see what it means," replied the mole. "It means that some very careless person has left his door scraper laying about in the middle of the Wildwood." And that is a picture of a door scraper. Okay? "Oh dear," cried the rat in despair. "Here, stop arguing and come and dig." He set to work again and made the snow fly in all directions. After some further effort, a very shabby doormat lay exposed to view. "There, what did I tell you?" explained the rat. "Absolutely nothing," replied the mole with perfect truthfulness. "You seem to have found another piece of domestic litter." Do you mean to say, cried the excited rat, that this doormat doesn't tell you anything? Really, rat? Said the mole. Who ever heard of a doormat telling anyone anything? They simply don't do it. Doormats know their place. Now look here, you thick-headed beast, replied the rat, really angrily. Keep digging if you want to sleep dry and warm tonight. The rat, using his cudgel, attacked a snowbank with great ferocity. The mole scraped busily, too. Some 10 minutes later, the rat's cudgel struck something that sounded hollow. He called the mole to come help. Before long, their efforts were rewarded. For there, on the side of the snowbank, stood a little door. An iron bell pole hung by the side. Below the bell on the small brass plate were the moonlit words, Mr. Badger. The mole fell backwards in the snow. Rat, he cried, you're a wonder. You knew that if there was a door scraper, there were bound to be a doormat. If only I had your head, Ratty. But as you haven't, interrupted the rat, I suppose you're going to sit on the snow all night and talk. Get up at once and hang on to the bell pole while I hammer. Okay. Now, were your predictions correct about what happened in the story? What season is this chapter set in? Winter. How do you know? It's cold and snowy, and the mole is wearing winter clothes. And of course, the mole's wearing clothes at all, just causes personification again. When Mole asks Rat to go with him to see Mr. Badger, why do you think Rat wants to postpone the visit or tells Mole evasively that he doesn't think Mr. Badger is at home? Mr. Badger lives in the Wildwood, and the rat seems a little uncomfortable about going there. He'd rather see Mr. Badger come visit him. What is the setting for this chapter? The Wildwood. Good job. How would you describe the Wildwood? Scary, strange, and dark, etc. What kind of things are there? Blooming trees, holes with animals that look at Mole with malice. At the beginning of the story, from which character's perspective is the story told? Mole's. Very good. So what is happening in the story when the story changes to Rat's perspective? Mole is lost and Rat goes looking for him. How does Rat find Mole in the Wildwood? Rat goes armed with pistols to the Wildwood and calls to Mole for more than an hour until he hears Mole's feeble answer. How does Rat answer Mole's question about whether or not Mr. Toad would go to the Wildwood? He laughs heartily. What does he say? Old Toad, he wouldn't show his face here alone for anything. I must interject here. When Mole is wandering around the Wildwood, we know that the whistling sound makes him go louder. So hopefully you got that. He was hearing his own feet. So as he was going faster, he kept thinking that he was being chased by something because he was hearing his own footprints go faster. But it was really just himself that he was hearing. So it's quite frightening for him to be afraid of himself. How do Rat and Mole find Mr. Badger's door? Purely by accident. Mole stumbles on the door scraper. Then Rat finds the doormat, which Mole calls another piece of domestic litter. Then they find the door by searching through the snow. Now I'm going to ask you a question, and I'll give you a minute to think about the question, and then turn to your neighbor and discuss the question. And then I'll call in several people in class. If you're doing this at home, you can just write down the answer. Okay. In previous lessons, you learned about the themes of friendship, loyalty, responsibility, and irresponsibility. What are examples of those themes in this chapter? You may want to have the worksheet from Lesson 3 that we pulled out on themes available to fill out, to add to the chart. Because again, we're going to keep looking at these friendship, loyalty, responsibility, and irresponsibility themes. And next time's lesson, we will add to that as another theme will present itself. Okay? You might have put several things under friendship and loyalty. Rat going into the Wildwood to find Mole, Rat letting Mole rest, Rat bandaging Mole's leg, Rat helping Rat dig, Mole helping Rat dig to find the doormat, irresponsibility, Mole taking off for the Wildwood all by himself and without knowing his way. Responsibility, Rat going after Mole, making sure that he is safe. Those are all good answers. I expect some fresh, unique individual ones as well. Word work for this lesson is postpone. You heard the word postpone. The mole had long wanted to meet Badger, but the water rat always had a reason to postpone the occasion. To postpone means putting something off or rescheduling it till later. So, for example, we had to postpone the baseball game until the rain comes. So think of an instance when you had to postpone something. In class, we'll have students answer this question. At home, you can just write down an answer, using the word postpone as part of your answer. Here's a creating sentence activity. You're going to read several sentences that describe the word postpone, and make a sentence use the word postpone to describe the same thing you heard in the initial sentence. The word postpone can be used with respect to events and time. So, dentist and appointment. That can be, my mom had to postpone the dentist appointment. Tennis match and hurricane. We must postpone the tennis match because of the hurricane. Test and blizzard. You okay with that? Because of the blizzard, school was canceled and Mrs. Smith had to postpone the math test. Oh, too bad. Lunch and busy. I called to postpone my lunch date because I was too busy. Launch and space shuttle. NASA had to postpone the launch of the space shuttle because of bad weather. Very good. Now, alternate ending. Here's an option assignment for you to work on. In the read aloud today, Rat and Mole, or Mole and Rat, are lost in the Wildwood because of the snow. Eventually, they stumble upon Badger's door and knock on it, hoping he could provide them with shelter. What would have happened if it had been summer instead of winter? Would Mole and Rat have gotten lost? If not, what would they have done? Would they still have gone to Badger's home? So we'll divide students into groups to construct alternate endings for this chapter, the Wildwood, and have one student in each group act as a scribe writing down the ideas, and make sure that you use details of the summer season in your endings. You also could include an illustration as well. Each student needs to write down their group's response on their own paper in Domain 1 Listening Journal, page 4. It looks like this. If we don't have that, just do it on a regular piece of paper. This also works for an at-home assignment. If you're doing this as homework or extra work, you can come up with your own alternate ending to the story and think about how it would have ended differently if it were summertime instead of winter. So, in other words, come up with an alternate ending to the story in this chapter if it had been summer instead of winter. What would have happened with Mole and Rat? How would their adventure gone differently? And would they have ended up with Badger? Okay. That is the end of lesson 4 for Wind in the Willows. See you in the next lesson. Thank you.